Doom Eternal's The Ancient Gods Part 1 is the first expansion for the excellent base title released in March of 2020. Released in October of 2020, Part 1 continues the Doomslayer story in his effort to defeat the Legions of Hell once and for all. Part 1 is a substantial addition to the base game with 3 new, beautiful levels that advance the narrative in significant and exciting ways. However, it doesn't present the challenging and rewarding experience that the base game does. Doom Eternal continues after the destruction of the Icon of Sin to prevent a new, much larger war on the cosmos from the demonic hordes who have since corrupted Urdak. To say any more would serve to spoil critical plot points and character development for central figures within the Doom universe. Suffice to say that there are critical reveals here that have significant implications for the future of the series. Just as the base title, The Ancient Gods Part 1 is beautiful, with excellent environmental art and astounding views for the player to experience. Across 3 levels, the Slayer will visit an offshore research platform during a massive thunderstorm, the literal bowels of hell in the blood swamps, and finally, return to the Maker's homeworld of Urdak via a beautiful but deadly forest adjacent to Urdak's center. The graphical detail is impressive, and as only a few enemies have been added to the opposing roster, not a lot changes here. If you've played Eternal, you can expect more of the same excellent presentation that's exhibited there. As far as the soundtrack, I honestly and regrettably didn't really notice it all that much. This is in part due to the new and more frustrating design philosophy of the combat encounters, where I really couldn't focus on the music due to the increased intensity here, but also because I noticed the music was interfering with my ability to sometimes hear enemy spawns. Because of this, I turned the music off. To start, for The Ancient Gods Part 1, all unlocks from the base game are given to the player, and it's because you'll very much need them. Weapon mods, runes, suit unlocks, all of them are at your disposal. The 3 levels present in Part 1, the UAC Atlantica facility, the Blood Swamps, and the Holt, feature great and interesting level design that is much less accommodating than those in the base game. What I mean by this is that even though I felt the levels themselves, the environments and their accompanying geometry were rich and varied, interesting to traverse, and a joy to look at, the enemies in this DLC and the design of their encounters is absolutely punishing, and not often in a good way. On the UAC Atlantica, the Ancient Gods waste no time in throwing you back into hell against a veritable horde of murderous demons that want nothing more than to end your mission there and then. Enemy composition in this level is intense, and as it relates to singular encounters, it's also excellent, and with the addition of the new stationary turret enemy can present even more split-second decision making. There are a lot of surprise encounters and off-guard moments where I think many players may be surprised and killed on the spot. In some cases, the encounters are a bit more extended than what I was expecting, but never in a bad way. In one instance, I was trapped with a tyrant in a short hallway with 0 cover. While I was very much caught off guard, I was able to kill it on the first try, and just like the base game, that made me feel like a badass. In a different encounter much later in the level, I wiped the floor with 2 Marauders and then entered a fight that culminated in a face-off with 2 Fireborn Barons and 2 Tyrants. And while that was a very long, drawn-out fight, when I beat it, I truly felt like I had accomplished something worth celebrating. Having said that, visiting the Blood Swamps is where this DLC goes to hell, both literally and figuratively. The level itself is awe-inspiring, and considering this was a place mentioned in the base game's codex, I was eager to explore it and better understand its significance. It's a disgusting, fetid basin that contains the decomposed remains of demons and features dangers not present in the base title. The dangers these present is especially apparent in one encounter in which you have to stay within a protective bubble, but on the escort's terms, not yours. In other words, you have to move your ass if you want to stay alive, and for a short time at least, you're discouraged from exploring and are forced to move forward and keep killing or fall behind and die. The pace and forced hustle this presents adds to the stress that is already an understood component of Eternal, but do know that after you're successful, you will get a few moments to rest and collect your bearings. Just after this, you're introduced to this level's and arguably this DLC's main addition, the Spirit. To be clear, I think that this is the worst addition to this DLC, and it made the game, in my opinion, unfun to the point where I didn't want to play it anymore. Let me explain. Spirits, summoners killed by the Doomslayer in Doom 2016, are back and are intent on avenging their deaths by using the Slayer's guts as penance. To accomplish this, they possess an enemy, sometimes at random, and drastically increases that demon's damage resistance, increases its attack and movement speed, protects its weak points from being destroyed, and they protect it from being frozen. To defeat these possessed foes, you're required to engage them without the devastating combo that is the ballista and plasma rifle, as they're resistant to plasma ammunition. Even after tearing off that meat suit and exposing the ethereal being within, you have to, somewhat ironically, use the plasma stream from your Ghostbuster gun to finish them off, often under fire. This does present the interesting tactical dilemma of either targeting that much more dangerous foe and finishing it off, but at the risk of the spirit within escaping and continuing that punishing cycle with another adjacent enemy. On the other hand, you could full clear every other foe and finish off the spirit's host last. The problem with this initially engaging mechanic is that it's stupidly unbalanced, to the point where after my first couple of encounters with it, I turned down the difficulty to the easiest from the nightmare I had it set on. To be clear, the mechanic itself is awesome, but the possessed demon, especially the possessed Fireborn Barons and potentially possessable Doom Hunters that this level likes to throw at you, are stupidly unfun and punishing to the point of absurdity. This, coupled with the aforementioned fungi, makes these encounters difficult to the point of frustration, and again, not in a good way. This level also features a section where a fog similar to the one featured in the base game's Super Gore Nest descends upon that section to obscure your vision in an effort to make the encounters more difficult. Considering you're fighting a Doom Hunter, a possessed Arachnotron, shielded soldiers, and the swamp's explosive fungi all the while, this is a frankly demoralizing section that I dreaded beating my head against all nightmare, so I didn't. Finally, as the final trial of each half of this level, there's a frankly unreasonably long and punishing encounter for both that I really couldn't even begin to stomach. I played these on the lowest difficulty so I could kind of preview these and see if I'd like to challenge them on nightmare difficulty. Once I had seen how the encounters played out and saw what I was up against, I decided that just getting through them the one time was fine. For the level's closing boss fight, I turned the difficulty back up to nightmare and moved my ass as much as possible in order to avoid being stomped underfoot while blinding the eyes of Malagog. The Ancient Gods Part 1 closes with a visit back to Urdak, the Maker homeworld present in Eternal. Instead of the sky-hopping platforming present in the base titles Urdak, you traverse a beautiful, holy techno forest just outside of your main objective, Urdak's Luminarium. This level's addition is the Blood Maker, an enemy similar but distinct from the base title's Maker drone. While powerful, this foe isn't too difficult. Just stay a good distance away and aim for the head when it goes to Vitruvian, and you'll be fine. The problem is that spirits are once again included here to basically ruin the balance of the game's otherwise excellent bestiary. There are two really fun encounters near the end of the hole, however, and these consist of literal tons of pinkies and a legion of shielded soldiers. And yes, they're such fun in part explicitly because of the omission of spirits within those encounters. The DLC ends with a boss fight where I once again turned up the difficulty nightmare and thanked the ancient gods for Sentinel armor. It took me a bit, but once I figured out the boss's pattern of attacks, I was able to juggle evading those with killing the fight's adds. Yes, there are more spirits here, but thankfully they're included here in a way that I feel is much more balanced and reasonable, and in hindsight, I think these should be confined and limited to these focused encounters and boss fights. The DLC's close is an awesome ending that sets up Part 2 in a devilish cliffhanger that raises the stakes of the Doom series. Based on that alone, I'm excited to see how this entry ends, and I'm looking forward to the next piece of DLC. I just hope that spirits don't return in any significant capacity. At the time of this review in early March of 2021, The Ancient Gods Part 1 sits at $20 American on Steam. It's also coupled with Part 2 for $30 American. Otherwise, it's available in the Doom Eternal Deluxe Edition for a total of $90 American. There are no microtransactions within or added to this DLC. It's also standalone, meaning if you just like to play this and not the base game, you're able to. While the UAC Atlantica was equal parts challenging and fun, the Blood Swamps and the Holt falter by comparison. To be frank, they kind of suck. They're almost single-handedly ruined, and not by the design of the levels, but by an alienating and frankly unreasonably punishing design philosophy. It really feels like these levels, and the spirit encounters in particular, were made as a smug challenge to the absolute top tier of Ultra Nightmare Conquering Doom players. As a result, in my opinion, they serve to alienate and even kind of insult the millions of Doom players who aren't in that top echelon of hardcore players. At the same time, Part 1 provides an interesting and engaging 3 levels that I believe reward casual and hardcore players alike, just not necessarily from a balanced gameplay perspective. If you love Doom Eternal, you'll still find a lot to love here, and I do feel it's worth the purchase. This is especially true if you're either a hardcore Doom player, in which case I'm guessing you already bought and destroyed this DLC, or you're not super concerned with some arbitrary measure of accomplishment like I try not to be. It admirably sets up the ultimate encounter that will presumably conclude Doom Eternal, just not necessarily in a way that I felt was welcoming to new players, and even to many existing ones.